that.
Tell them where you were when
I
you
was
came.
actually in Bangladesh.
When I opened the African dining hall in Dubai, I had written every recipe and concept. I had done everything. And then I paused because I thought how arrogant an African American designing and developing this whole conversation about Africans.
Historians say that African food traditions date back thousands of years, rooted in indigenous agricultural practices, trade, migration, and many other factors. It's perhaps why traditional African cuisine is as varied as the continent itself, encompassing a wealth of ingredients like grains, vegetables, spices, and proteins. In the new cookbook, The Contemporary African Kitchen, award-winning chef Alexander Smalls highlights Africa's culinary diversity with 120 dishes from chefs that are at the forefront of the continent's food movement. He says that the book tells the stories of chefs who are reinventing African cuisine for a global audience while offering a window into Africa's culinary future. He joins me together with the book's co-author and founder of Dine Diaspora, Nina Oduro. Let's start off by talking about how this collaboration started off and what was the inspiration behind this book?
Well, the book really has been my journey through the lens of food. I grew up in Gullah Geechee community, Gullah Geechee culinary experience. The one thing you can say about Gullah Geechee folk is that you know who they are by what they eat. And the Gullah Geechee is Charleston, Beaufort, and the Gullah Islands, a direct connection to West Africa.
Yes.
Absolutely. And of course, enslaved Africans were not allowed to read or write, so they kept the stories and the lore of who they were and where they came from through oral history. So much of my young life was spent with oral history about West Africa, the Gullah Geechee people, and the ancestors. So fast forward, after an operatic career and traveling throughout the world, one of the things I noticed is that we as Black people were not in the culinary conversations, etc. I mean, our food was just not considered worthy to be embraced.
To be spoken of.
Absolutely. And so when I decided that I was no longer going to pursue a career in classical music, I decided I was going to open the first fine dining African-American restaurant. And so I did. In the early 90s, I brought the food of the Gullah Geechee people to New York, and I created a culinary expression that was fine dining with wine pairing and all this stuff, and people thought I had lost my mind. I say to young chefs all the time, the reason I was able to do that is because I owned. And so through all the naysayers, and all of which were not other than African Americans, because African American people thought I'd lost my mind. But I set out to do this thing, which was a tremendous success, but it laid the foundation because after 3 restaurants based on Gullah Geechee culture, I started to think about where did this start?
Where did it come from?
A connection. Yeah. And then I took 10 years off, traveled the transatlantic slave trade, the far East Indian Ocean slave trade into India, China, and Asia, and I understood that the footprint of African people were basically on 5 continents. And so I created a culinary discipline that was built on through slavery.
Tracing those different
Absolutely. How through slavery, Africa changed the global culinary conversation. This led to opening the first Afro-Asian American brasserie in New York, which the recipes were put in a book, Between Harlem and Heaven, which won the James Beard Award and set me out on a bigger journey. The call came to open the first African dining hall in the world in Dubai. And Nina followed me there, documented the experience with her film crew, and essentially that dining hall became the blueprint for this book. Now, the step I'm leaving out is essentially once I had brought on Faden, they loved the idea. Faden Press,
The publishers
yes,
of the book, yeah.
makes some of the most beautiful books in the world. Once they signed on and agreed, and this at this point was my third book, it was like, okay, go do it. And I realized I was missing something. And what I was missing was Nina Oduro.
Yes.
What I was missing was a project manager and a co-curator who could help me put all of this on paper.
Yeah.
So what we did is we created a tribe. We essentially decided that we were doing this book north, south, east, west, and central Africa. And we, through our chef community, because we're very visible on social media, we had built already a community of chefs globally of the African diaspora. So we got busy. My reputation in the field attracted a lot of people. Nina's reputation for working with chefs in the DC area. And we put together our tribe.
I love it. I love it. You call it the tribe. So, Nina, he says that the first, I guess, the idea to bring you onto the project started when you went to document the restaurants, his restaurant in Dubai. How did you find out about Alexander in the first place? And how
that
did
is a really, really funny and interesting story. So social media does a lot for everyone. So our story goes back to social media. So while running Dine Diaspora, we heard about all the amazing work that Alexander had been doing in New York and throughout the African diaspora foodways in general. And my business partner, Mame Boachi, and I said to ourselves, we have to meet this guy. He's so incredible. We DM'd him. We sent him a direct message, and he responded.
Wow.
We said, we love you. We want to come to New York. We want to meet with you. Alexander actually responded and said, come, and let's go out to lunch. We had lunch. We brought our book with us for him to sign, thinking that, at least we got his signature.
One of his books.
Yes. At least we got his signature, if nothing else. But even that day, Alexander began to turn his mind around how we could work together in the future. And so oftentimes when we would meet again, we developed a friendship. And he kept saying, we're going to work together. And the call came years later for this book.
Tell them where you were.
I was actually in Bangladesh. Working on another project at that time. Hours in between us, maybe 14, 50, I don't even remember. It was very much a long period of time between us. But he called and I was like, I'm here. He's like, what are you doing there? I was like, whatever. He's like, whatever you're doing.
Stop.
Yeah.
You need to get on the next flight.
We have a book to do. So.
I love to hear that. So let's talk about the book itself. How does this cookbook aim to make African cuisine more accessible to global audiences?
Oh my goodness. There's never been a book like this. And, we understood very early in the process, and again, this is a little piece I left out with respect to process. When I opened the African dining hall in Dubai, I had written every recipe and concept. I had done everything. And then I paused because I thought, how arrogant an African American designing and developing this whole conversation about Africans. And while I consider myself an African, I'm a few generations removed. And in that moment, I said, I have to regroup. I have to invite Africans to be a part of this for the authenticity and the trust and the shared value. Because, the whole idea is to build bridges and to get us all at the table. And so that's when I brought in other chefs and gave them the opportunity to create their own sense of expression. So that same concept came alive in this book. We put together 32 chefs, or is it 33?
33.
33
So
chefs
many.
in different time zones,
Representing
different
different parts
languages.
of the continent.
Yes, because once we understood how we were going to populate the book, north, south, east, west, central, then we understood what we needed to do. There was no way to bring all 54 countries of Africa in. The book would be this big.
Yeah.
But what we could do is bring chefs who are a part of the various regions that we wanted to share. The idea was, and we gave them specific criteria. We wanted it to show their best. Nina asked them, if you were making a dinner for Alexander, what would you make? This is what we want you to bring to light.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so they took the instructions and ran with it. But the other criteria was, because these are leading chefs, they had to create these recipes for the home chef. I wanted women in Iowa, in Nebraska, Arizona, in the South. I wanted people to pick this book up, first and foremost, relate to each chef personally, because the way we
Create that
curated
connection
it,
with
they tell their story. They're up close and personal. They tell you about where they came from, who they are, and then they made the dishes so simple yet so incredibly elegant and rich that anyone could pick up this book and make that. So the idea of the book was not only to educate, but to give people, to demystify African food and give people an opportunity to embrace it as a cuisine they could own.
So Nina, speaking about demystification, I want to ask you first of all, how did you select these chefs? What was the criteria? But going back to the little, to some of the demystification, what would you say are some of the misconceptions about African food that you hope this book will help address?
Yeah, so Alexander shared a bit about how we selected, right? Making sure that they were for the home cook. But one thing that he didn't share is that these chefs had to already be present in Africa, doing incredible work already in the culinary scene. So, these chefs had to have concepts of their own. They're not just, in and out of Africa, and elsewhere, but they're actually entrenched in the communities that they're from, doing some kind of culinary work. So that was a big criteria for this book that I would add to Alexander's. And then you ask about demystifying, repeat that
some
question.
Of the misconceptions that will be demystified by this book.
I think there's some that will be demystified, certainly, but there's some that I think people just have gaps in knowledge. And this book will do more of that, because what we believe is that the people featured in this book are already demystifying. Every day they're sharing their recipes. Every day they're sharing a lot of the works that they're passionate about through food. So they're already doing this work. What this book does is fill some of the gaps about recipes that people may not know of, but it doesn't entrench Africa into just a box, right? It shares with you that there's many, many, many foods, many, many dishes across the continent, and there's many people behind that food. And they're doing incredible work to shape how you view it and how you taste it and how you experience it.
Yeah. So what are some of the regional cooking techniques or ingredients that you feel were underrepresented globally that are in this book? Because I know many people who have, I don't know if you have some North African chefs in here.
Oh, absolutely.
Most people have said, well, I've never tested a North African food. I don't know how it tastes. It's not well represented.
Well, and guess what? The book in and of itself, let's take North Africa. Those chefs, Morocco, Egypt, Tunisia, they are bringing, their dishes. Let's take couscous. A lot of people still don't know what couscous is. And it's an incredible stew that's served with roasted, grilled, or braised meats. There's a lot of chutneys and spices and sauces that go with it. It's truly one of my favorites, but also the grain couscous. A lot of people haven't been exposed to it. Most people think it's Italian pasta, and interestingly enough, there's this huge movement, Fonio,
that
our dear friend Chef Pierre Cham, who is also in the book, is bringing back to life. You know, so these kind of grains, you know, as well as rice, which actually, interestingly enough, rice is that ingredient that built the South. People think it's cotton, but it was rice.
I'm just learning that right now. Actually, I didn't know that.
And these growers were selected from certain parts of West Africa in order to do that work. I say all that simply to say that the ingredients here are not mystifying. They're not complicated. Most people have, at some point in their life, you know, experienced a couscous salad, maybe, you know, because that grain sometimes gets used in sort of a vegetables kind of salad thing. But to see it in its authenticity, and then to have these chefs take you on a journey of their home dishes, making them as comfortable and as accessible as Italian food.
Yeah. And go ahead.
Yeah, I would also, you know, add to that there's going to be elements that are new to people. You know, Central Africa hasn't been celebrated for food like other parts of the continent. You may have heard of South African dishes, West African, East African, all over, but Central Africa gets to shine here in this book. The other thing that people get to do is really see that there's different ways of cooking African food. It doesn't have to be traditional, and these chefs show us new ways of re-envisioning some of the ingredients.
Yeah.
And we also offer options and substitutions just in case, for whatever reason, they can't find them.
Yeah.
But at the same time, we don't want to overly demystify, because we also want people to rise to the challenge. You know, when you talk about igusi, you know, and what that is, and you know, they're surprised to learn it's a melon, and they're surprised to learn that the seeds contribute so much to the flavor component. So, you know, we want people to embrace, even if it's a challenge, or even if it's like, oh, I never had that before.
How much of that information is contained in the book?
It's there.
The extra information on the...
Yeah, so
it's all
each
in
recipe
here.
has a story from the chef's perspective. So many times you'll learn about the actual name of the dish in the local language. Many times you'll hear a story or read a story about how that chef maybe interacted with the dish as a child and grew up and then started making it. So there's a lot of background information about each of the recipes.
Now, I know, Nina, you were from Ghana, West Africa. You enjoy a lot of Ghanaian dishes. But can you talk about a traditional Ghanaian dish? Actually, I want to first ask, which Ghanaian chef did you select? I'm sure you had a little difficulty in deciding on which one of the chefs but also talk about any of the traditional dishes in Ghana that was reimagined in an unexpected way in this book.
So let me just say, there's not just one, right? There's multiple Ghanaian chefs in this book, just like there are from other countries. And I wasn't responsible for anyone. It's a collaboration between Alexander and I to make sure that if they were represented here, that they're bringing a lens of a country that needs to be in this book. And then as far as the dish, Nana Araba Wilmot does emutuo. Emutuo is a rice ball with peanut butter stew. She does one that is actually fried in dough. So it's quite Italian spin on it. And she has this is one of her signature dishes that she brought to this collection. So many Ghanaians might walk to this and be like, ooh, this is not regular emutua, but that's just fine.
Yeah.
This is a take on it that really allows us to re-envision something that we already love.
Yeah.
But also, that's the point. You see the contemporary.
Yeah.
So these chefs are already working with global flavors and tastes all over the globe. And so bringing that back to their traditions is really what we were looking for. We want them to reinterpret, you know, their legacy for the world to enjoy.
Yeah. Is there a particular recipe or story that stands out to you personally for both of you in here?
There's so many stories, and I think one of the ones that sticks with me a lot is our North African chef, Mohammed Kamal, who provides recipe from the Nubian people. This is a group that doesn't always has seldom gotten to provide their dishes to the world. And so having his dishes and dishes from the Nubian people is central and critical for telling the African story.
I love it. I love it. So where do you see the future of African cuisine heading on the global stage? I know you have your restaurant in Dubai.
Yes, Al Kibulan.
Al Kibulan.
And-
How is it doing?
Well, it's doing
What
very
has
well.
been the reaction to it so
It
far?
opened 4 years ago for Expo 2020, and it has been hitting it out of the park, literally. And we have brought in guest chefs, at various times to show what they're doing around the globe in the African diaspora space. What we're doing now is looking to take Al Kibulan and expand that palette from Dubai to New York, London, and Accra.
Oh, that's
Those are the
amazing.
4 places where we
Regions.
want to.
Yeah.
Yes.
We have to
start
mention
this
the
movement.
name. That's the original name of Africa, right?
It is the original
That's a
written
great
name
name.
of
Yeah.
Africa.
Yeah.
It's an Arab name. The Europeans showed up, couldn't pronounce
Much
it.
later
and called it Africa. But yes, Al Kibulan.
Yeah.
And it's most fitting because it really is what I feel is the engine of the movement.
Yeah.
From a global perspective. African chefs are on fire, and they're cooking all over Europe, all over the United States. They have Michelin awards, but they are bringing, they're cooking in the fine dining style, but in the African heritage, in the African palate, if you will. And it's fantastic what they're doing.
I love that. So Nina, finally, I wanted to ask you, how can we continue to support African chefs and the culinary industry at large on the continent?
Certainly. Well, besides getting the book, and that's a great place to if you're starting is a great place, whether you're an expert, it's also a great place. So make sure you support the work, but also make sure you patronize, right? We just talked about the restaurants, from Al Kibulan to places in Washington, D.C., places in Nairobi. They're the gateway to African foods. If you can make it into a home, even better for you.
Yeah.
And then there's just also finding out, going beyond the food. Get to know some of the chefs. Get to know who's
Their
behind
stories.
the shoot.
Yeah.
Support them. They evolve. They do incredible work globally. And so we need to also pay attention to the people behind the food.
Yeah.
And I would also say, go visit the chefs. Go visit. They'll have the welcome mat. They're all in Africa waiting for you to come.
Absolutely.
Take the book, get their signature, and ask for that dish.
I love it. I love it. The contemporary African kitchen, home cooking recipes from the leading chefs of Africa. Great work. Great work, both of you. Thank you for bringing this to the world. Nina, I have to say congratulations to you. Dine Diaspora marks 10 years this year.
Yes.
Tell us a little bit about your journey before we close this off, and how does that feel 10 years later?
I mean, thank you so much. Dine Diaspora has been on an incredible journey, started right here in DC. Many people in the area have seen it grow and grow and grow. 10 years feels incredible. It's more incredible to have people like Alexander Smalls who are making such a large footprint on African diaspora cuisine really be part of our fold, and to have this 10-year journey and to be able to have the networks to really make more impact is what we need, and I'm really proud of that.
I love that. I love that.